Dr. Rhodes, thanks so much for taking the time here and sharing your expertise with us. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with your background. You have quite a dense academic background. Seems like you like to learn. So tell us kind of the trajectory of your career.
Yeah, so I have an undergraduate a double major in math and economics, master's in applied mathematics from Texas A&M, and a PhD in civil engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. There were multiple points along that line where after the financial crisis, I was getting out of school and decided, well, there's no jobs really, so I'm pretty good at the school thing, so I guess I'll just keep going, and ended up being there for 12 years.
You did keep going. So
Yeah.
what kind of work are you doing today?
So a lot of the work we do focuses around modeling energy systems and the related systems that and the systems that they're related to, with a focus on the electricity sector. But the electricity sector touches the natural gas sector, and it touches the water sector, and it touches, it's more and more touching transportation as we electrify transportation. And electricity basically gives us all of the things that we want, and so it touches all of the things that we use on a daily basis.
I've read some books and articles, around power and how dependent we are on it. And I saw startling stats that I wonder if you agree with, or if you have, maybe you would give some academic research around this if it exists. That, for example, if we were to lose the power grid in the United States for a year, 90% of its population would die. And things of that nature, where they project what the impact is or how dependent we are on power and the power grid right now. What's your view on those types of things?
I mean, if we lost electricity for a year, it would be catastrophic. I mean, since we use electricity for so many different things, so many people's work involves electricity, so many, people's, everyday life involves electricity. The supply chains that bring the food and and all of the other things that we rely on a daily basis. I mean, yes, if we lost electricity, it would be catastrophic. I don't think many of us know how to live as they did in the 1920s and before.
Yeah. So, given that, what is your opinion of the grid as it exists today? How vulnerable is it? Is it, because a lot of people are saying it's very vulnerable. We should be spending a lot more money on securing the grid. Other people saying it's overblown. What's your opinion?
I mean, if you look at the American Society of Civil Engineers, they give our energy infrastructure a D plus, which is in college is just barely passing. And my own research that I've done looking at it, if we had to replace all of the power plants, all of the wires, all the poles, all of the transformers, it would cost about $5 trillion to do
Wow.
that across in the US. But if you look at the age of the infrastructure as it exists, it's about half depreciated, meaning we need to spend trillions of dollars on the grid just to keep things the way they are, let alone evolve to meet our, the changing demands that we, put on the system.
Mhm. So that's a big price tag for sure.
Yeah.
And do you eat that elephant one bite at a time? Do you just kind of do it incrementally over a period of many years, or how's that done?
I mean, there are certain things that you do. Some of this is just backlog maintenance that hasn't been done on things like dams and transmission lines and things like that. And some of it is building new things because populations are growing. We are electrifying more parts of our daily lives, and so we're going to use more. We're kind of moving into into a new century using last century's technology, and so it's not always going to work out for us.
So recently, what made national news is what happened in Texas, where you reside, where they had some unexpected weather that I live in Park City, Utah, which would have been like nothing for where I live, but in Texas, it was considered very extreme.
Right.
And power was lost. I think water was lost. I heard some people talk about that they were very close to having the grid go down for maybe even months, which would be catastrophic. What was your assessment of that whole situation, and how did you interpret it?
Yeah, one of the things as we were having conversations during and after. I was one of those who lost power for 4 days, and inside the house got down into the 40s, which is extremely cold for inside. One of the conversations we were having with people who live in other parts of the country is, that's just normal weather for places like where you're at in Utah. But your grid may do differently if you had 100 days over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And that's what the Texas grid is kind of built for. It's built for that summer, and so we had this blind spot really in the winter. Not a true blind spot, because we had similar weather that we saw back in 2011, 1989, other times, where we should have learned some of these lessons of the vulnerabilities of our different system. One of them being, the electricity sector was counting on the natural gas sector to be firm, and to be able to provide the gas when it was being demanded of the system, and that really didn't happen. We had fallout of half of our thermal fleet was down at any given, or half of our thermal fleet was down during the time when Texas would have been demanding the most amount of electricity to meet heating demands across the state. And we had so much generation go down that we were just minutes away from losing the entire system, because with electricity you have to match supply and demand perfectly in real time, because if you don't do that, if you get supply and demand too far out of sync or for too long, power plants will actually shut themselves down in order to protect themselves from the grid, because it gets a bit wonky, but the grid in North America operates at 60 hertz, meaning, and power plants are like physically coupled to that frequency. So the steel shafts inside the power plants are actually spinning at 60 hertz, 60 revolutions per second. And so that's what electricity is being delivered at to homes and businesses, is being delivered at 60 hertz. If there's too much demand on the system, it will actually cause the frequency to fall. And if that imbalance gets too far, you can actually shear the metal shafts off inside of power plants. We've actually seen this happen in Germany before, when the frequency got too far out of whack. So it's not that the whole system could go down, but it can also destroy itself on the way down, which is problematic, which is one of the reasons why it could have taken months to get the system back online, had the entire thing, gone down.
So now, and so you basically affirmed that we were potentially minutes away from something like that happening. Is that true?
Yeah. So if you look at the way the frequency was going, the frequency can drop to a certain point, and if it stays there long enough, power plants will start disconnecting themselves from the system in order to save their hardware, to make sure that they can start back up. The problem is power plants are not like cars that you can just walk out and turn a key and the engine starts and it starts making power or motion. These are massive machines, and in some cases, to get them started, they actually have to pull energy from the grid to start spinning all of their equipment before they can switch over to their own fuel and start pushing power out into the grid. And so if every single power plant went down, you have what you call a black start event, where you have to black start the grid. And there's a certain number of power plants we actually pay to have that capacity, but it's a very slow process, because you might be able to go out and start one particular power plant, and then you've got to somehow get that power to another power plant to get that one started. And in the meantime, you have to bring on a little bit of load, because again, you have to match supply and demand in real time, and you have to do that incrementally, slowly. And if you've lost power for long enough, you might not have telemetry on the grid. And so you might have to actually physically send people out to various transmission lines and distribution lines to manually turn them off and on, to make sure that the power that you're creating at one power plant can flow to another power plant in order to get that started. And if you get that system out of whack, the whole thing, goes down. Every grid has a black start plan, but no one ever wants to actually have to implement it, because they've never really had to implement it, and it's not sure exactly how it would go.
So if there was power lost in Texas for 3 months, let's say, as a scenario, what would the impact have been?
I mean, it would be catastrophic. I mean, it's just, how we live and move and, consume resources or generate work and product and other resources all depends on electricity. I mean, the state of Texas, if it were its own country, would be something like the 10th largest GDP in the world. And all of that essentially would have come to a crashing halt, which would have impacted oil and gas supplies to other parts of the country and the world, because we produce so much oil and gas and refine so much oil and gas. So, if we lost power in Texas, like, it could have, a worldwide consequence.
Yeah, it's not just the people in Texas, but literally there've been a ripple effect. The interdependence is pretty significant.
For sure.
Thanks so much for being here and watching that video. And can I ask you to please subscribe to our channel so you can find out when we're posting new content. You'll be alerted right away when we do. To share this with people you think might benefit from the information, and certainly it helps us if you like the video. So if you like what you just saw, go ahead and hit that like button. And again, thank you so much for being here with me right now.